Hello YouTube, my name is Chris Pick. I am working on a transition period N-scale model railway. Modeling this in the UK, kind of the Cumbria area. And as you can tell by my accent, I don't sound very British. Both my parents are British, have a British passport, but I grew up riding on British trains, and I just have a deep love of what they look like in the old steam train. So transition period is going to work pretty well. This is the first video of my series. Hopefully I can continue this on for everyone. The railway is going to be called the Travisdale-Pickmere Railway, and I decided to get all the tools and all the supplies necessary to kind of go all out for a DCC layout. I will have all the supplies I've purchased linked down below, and hopefully this helps you out if you're getting started and you can watch me make my mistakes and hopefully not make them. I want to send a shout out to Charlie Bishop from Chadwick Model Railways. He has really helped me by publishing all of his videos, so I thought I'd do the same, and hopefully someone can learn from some of my videos in addition to his. I really recommend his videos. They are a great source of knowledge on model railway, although he is working on OO gauge. So not much of a difference though, but I wanted to get started and show you the railway and all the supplies. So what I have is I have a big table full of supplies, and I've broken these into basically 3 different sections: build, control, and track. And you can see from here I will kind of go through and do a quick overview, and then I will jump into each various item and give a kind of in detailed look at it, and you can look down below for some of the timeline segments of when each section's to the other end. Down below, I will see if I can zoom in on this. Sorry, my room is a little messy. You might be able to tell that there are some wheels down there that we can let's see, there we go. The table can roll on. The table's 11 foot long by 4 foot deep, which is pretty deep. So I'm going to focus on the build tools and what we need to build, and I'm not going to focus on scenery so much. I will lightly touch on weathering the track, but basically I'm going to do a full other section on that. But I just wanted to show what I've got started with, how it's working, and where to go. So my table's a little over-engineered. We'll get started with that. I'm not going to show anyone how to build a table. I think there's other suppliers for that. You can do things with a sawhorse or a couple of those and some thinner plywood. I basically got about 3/4 inch plywood and then 1 inch extruded foam. Here in the US, it is I'm using this pink board from Owens Corning. It's the R5, that's the 1 inch, and then I think they have an R10 or R15, which is 2 inch. I'm going to use some of that for my landscaping and scenery, but right now this is just about getting it laid out. So once you've got your table built, you will probably need some things for it, so we'll get started. Little screwdriver and set of screwdriver bits. I also have, it's not pictured, a set of drill bits, pretty useful. And for the builds, I also have a tape measure. I have a drywall saw, a little flat saw, and that pretty much covers it for the build system, I suppose. Oh, I guess I've got some other things. Sorry. I've got a Dremel-like rotary power tool here. I also have a wet dry shop vac so I can clean up after myself. And we'll jump right into kind of everything else. So, to do the layout board, you can see it's brown. I've got some brown paint here. It's called Havana Coffee. To glue it down, I use this Loctite PL300 foam board adhesive, and I've just got a little container to mix my paint in with a nice long paint roller. It's kind of hard to see. Sorry, everything's kind of a mess. My table is actually not big enough for all the things I've purchased for this kit. So I've got some, I think it's 22 gauge wire. I've got some 12 gauge wire for the DCC for the bus. And then I've got the drop wires that are like 22 or 24 gauge. Let's see. I then have a set of terminal strips, although I'm probably not going to use these. I'll show you what I'm going to use next. I've got a set of heat shrink tubing. I've got some basically called quilter T-pins, basically just push pins I can use to lay the track down. I've got a foam kind of sanding block. I've got a lovely ruler, tape measure, drywall saw, a little tiny screwdriver that I actually got from Nest when I had a Nest thermostat. And let's see, what else do we have? There's a lot. I got a micrometer, so I can do some fine measurements, which is pretty useful when you're working at end scale. I've got a couple of pin vices, so I can do some drilling through the rails. I also have, and I can't remember the name of these now. I'll put it up on as an overlay. Something like I think it's a DIN attachment. I'm going to use these instead of the terminal blocks. They basically are terminal blocks, but you can add them together. I don't need to kind of loop everything over. I can use these nice little red clips at the top. I'll go into more on how to do that on a later video. Got a nice little rework station I've purchased that has a soldering iron and heat gun, so I can do some soldering. I've got, as you can see, the foam board here. I've got more outside. I've got a couple of the inclines from Woodlands Scenics. Figured out that'd be useful to get some grades done. I've got the tortoise value pack. Got 12 of them. I need another 18 if my memory serves me correctly. I got some pipettes that I will be using for various gluing and other things around the track. I am going to control everything with DCC using the Digitrax. I've got the Digitrax starter set, the DCS 210, the the DT 500 controller, and I've got some other things coming for Digitrax, which I'll go into further detail when those arrive and I get to that part. I will have a link to every single one of these items used in my train track or my layout down below. I also have like a universal holder for my Digitrax controller. The tortoise switches here, these are slow motion switches for turnouts, and I have these snaps from Aculights. They plug onto the end of the tortoise switches so you can screw in instead of having to solder to the end of these connections here. Makes it a little nicer. I'm trying to minimize the amount of soldering I have to do. We'll see how that goes. I'm using Pico Streamline, I guess it's their Fine Line series, their F, for all the track. So I've got a couple of scissor crossovers, a couple of the, I can't even remember what these are, double slips, a crossing, then left and right turnouts, and I've got a few of them there. I've got, I think, another 9 on order or 10 on order, something ridiculous. Then I have about half the track I'm going to need. I've got something like 2,100 inches of track I'm going to have to lay on this layout, which is going to be pretty considerable. So I've got another 20 pieces of 3-foot sections of the Pico SL300F that will be coming in. I also have some of the sleeper wooden sleepers for joining. That way when you cut some of the sleepers away, you can replace them. I've got a couple buffer stops. I've got some metal joiners. I've got some insulated joiners because I'm going to be doing block sections all over. I've got track setters. Helps you get the track straight, especially on joints and curves. I've got the full set here. And we'll be using those more in some other videos. I also have over here a airbrush compressed air pump with an airbrush set. And then you can see I've got a nice little white building here and a 3D printer. Yes, I went and bought a 3D printer I use the excuse of using it for the model railway, but I'm going to probably use it for some other things. But as you can see, I've built a platform, I've got a little house, I've got a bridge, I've got some tunnel entrances. So I think it'll be pretty useful to be able to use for modeling. And I also have some books on signaling. I wasn't that familiar with semaphore signals in the UK, and since I'm doing the transition period, I figured might as well just go all out and just do all semaphores. So I think that pretty much covers it. Oh, I've got a canvas wheel here. I'll get to that more in a little bit, but when doing your track plans and wanting to basically get it from paper onto your underlayment, you can use the little spikes on this and run it over and make a kind of some holes in your underlayment so you know where to go. I also have the Midwest Products cork underlayment for end scale. So we'll be putting that under all the track to keep it nice and quiet. And I think that pretty much covers everything with the exception of one last thing. Now that last thing I mentioned is a computer. So you don't have to do this. I just felt with my design it was probably better. I'm using Rail Modeler Pro for the design of my track. As you can see it here, a bit of glare from the lights, I apologize. I believe it's Mac only, but out of all the various tools I used, it seemed to make the most sense and have the easiest learning curve for me to jump on. So pretty nice. There's a few things that it could do a little bit better, but overall I am really impressed with the software and I was happy to pay for it. Now, talking about paying for things, this hobby is not cheap. Everything so far has cost me probably close to $4,000 US. That includes some of the Dapple engines I've got. I've got a Flying Scotsman and a Mallard and a couple of cars. The 3D printer and track and everything else, it adds up very quickly. So, I also have one last thing. Sorry to detour here. I've got one coming on Sunday, I think. This is one, but it'll probably go into it a little bit more. This is just a hot foam cutter. Basically, it just cuts foam with heat. This one in particular is not very good. It's run through USB and doesn't get very hot, so it struggles to get through the 1-inch foam. Other than that, let's get into each of the individual sections and we will look at each one in detail. So looking at the tools a little bit more in depth, I've got the Ryobi jigsaw here. As you can see, it's got a saw blade on the bottom. It's pretty useful for cutting various pieces and trimming. Not sure how much more I'll need it after building my table, but it was useful at the beginning, especially to do some things like trimming off some pieces. So that's the first thing. Probably most of you are hopefully familiar with that. If not, it's not a tool that you actually really would need. You could use a handsaw if you needed to. Drill, I found this pretty much invaluable. As you can see, I've got bolts holding my table together. Lots and lots of bolts. These bolts needed to be drilled, have holes drilled for them, so hence the drill, which did a marvelous job. Just a cheap electric drill. Not had much success with batteries lasting on cordless drills, although it's been a few years, so I have gone corded. Now, I've got this little Tack Life driver bit, or driver, with a set of, sorry about this, with a set of bits. That has been not useful yet so much, but when it comes to assembling things, it's going to be pretty valuable, I think. Okay, so let's talk about Dremels, or rotary tools. This is an off-brand. It's Doxowee. A lot less expensive than a Dremel. To be honest with you, my very first Dremel I bought in university decades ago, the switch failed on it. It was pretty temperamental. I bought another one and now I can't find it. So instead of buying a third Dremel, I decided to go for a knockoff and see how that goes. I'll let everyone know. It came with a nice good kit of different tools, so pretty happy with that. and we will see how that goes. So I've got this Fat Max Stanley drywall saw. There's a number of different brands. Basically, this works pretty darn well to cut through foam. So that's why I've got it, hopefully doing some rough cuts. I've also dug this out of my garage, this Cobalt, I think it's a trim saw where you can trim like between the floor and a floorboard, and I figure this might be useful, so I brought it out. Next is a tape measure, pretty much invaluable, along with a metal ruler. Can't tell you how much I've already used both of these. It is quite useful. Now I've ordered a different kit for cutting through foam. It's just a hot wire cutter. This one was pretty cheap. It's like $10 US or less than that. Unfortunately, it was USB, and that isn't going to do very much when you've only got 1 amp, 5 volts going through it. So probably not going to use that at all anymore, and I will use the new one, but it's there for emergencies, I suppose. The PL300 foam board, that's what I used for gluing down. It's an adhesive. I used it to glue down the foam board to the wood, and then I used this flexible putty knife to just basically spread it really thin so it went down very easily. I then have a little paint dispenser. Paint, like I mentioned, it was the Havana Coffee. This is some Bear Ultra. I mean, I just got something brown and lovely looking. Got a paint roller, got a can opener, and got a long-handled roller just so I could reach across pretty easily. And that I'm not too worried about little holes on the table right now. Those will probably get covered up pretty easily. I just want to kind of get a coat on there so I could see what was done. As we move through the table, I've got this little 1-inch brush here. I'm actually going to probably use this when I do some of the scenery. Probably use it to get the little... So when I'm ballasting, this is a little early, I decided to pick this brush up just so I can go in between the track and kind of brush out any leftover ballast when I'm done. I also have some Gorilla Glue. Although this says dries natural color, I'm not sure if that's clear or not. So I need to test that out. I really want some clear glue. I think in the UK they call it PVA glue. Basically like Elmer's in the US, it seems like. Tools wise, I also have a little screwdriver here. Like I said, this was from Nest. I've got the micrometer. Basically tells you how far the gap is in between these two things here. And it also has a little pin at the bottom and another add-on to do different measurements. Been very useful already to measure things like height of the tunnels and station height, rail door height, things like that. So already using it quite a bit. As I mentioned earlier, here is the canvas wheel. Basically, it's got a bunch of sharp spikes on it. So when I print out my layout and I want to put it on the foam, I can roll this over and transfer it through by leaving a lot of little holes in the foam. That way I know where I can put my underlayment, which is going to be this cork from Midwest Products. So that was a nice transition to that, I suppose. Two of the other tools I've got here, I've got these pin vise with some of the little drill bits. Basically these are just tiny little drills, small enough with little bits that you really don't want to use a power drill because you may be drilling through track, through the ties. So pretty useful, happy to use that. Next I've got these Xuron track clips. One is a flush kit for cutting from above. The other is for side cutting. Really useful. Don't cut other things with these. The rails are not that strong, so don't try cutting through some like steel. It will destroy them. Use something a little bit more heavier duty if you've got to cut through some piano wire or something. Use something like this. I've got a couple different wire strippers. This old rusty thing. Just as a little bit of a backup. And then I've got this wire stripper here that kind of makes quick use of stripping the wires off. As I mentioned, quilter's pins. I've got these somewhere else also. I can kind of show a little bit. They look like this. You can stick them in the foam, and then you can use it to pin tracks down. Very useful, very cheap. I don't think I can have enough of those. I think I've got about 300-400 of them. Alright, next up, we'll do some wiring. I'm kind of going all over here. I apologize. I'm trying to transition now into the electronics. So I've got the 12 gauge wire, which I'm going to use for my DCC bus wire. Then it'll go into a DIN connector. I believe that was the correct name of it. With these terminal blocks that are pretty nice. They snap on, snap off. You can connect them together. And I'll do a little bit more in depth on these. They're not as cheap probably as the regular cheap terminal blocks. They certainly are a little bit more compact and a little easier to work with, I think. So gives you some flexibility. Not only that, they come in various different colors. You've got green. It's kind of hard to see. I've got everything still packaged up. I've got red. I've got black. And I have some white. And then I've got end caps. So we'll throw those over in the corner over here, since we've already looked at these. Now, I have a relatively inexpensive soldering iron. It's done okay. You know, it's served its purpose, but since I'm going all out on this, I felt like I needed to go with a rework station. So this has the ability to do some flow soldering as well as regular soldering with a tip. I've bought some liquid soldering flux. We'll see how that goes. It's got a very fine tip to it, almost like a needle, so I can get into nice little areas like along track joints so I can solder them together. I missed this earlier. I've got a green cutting, self-healing cutting board, which is pretty nice. I think it's like, 3 foot by 2 foot or so. Very nice for cutting things. I've got these heat shrink tubings. If you're not familiar with them, you can basically fit these over a wire and then apply some heat to it through like a hair dryer. It will shrink down and form a seal on your wires that you've soldered together. Pretty useful. Just got a little sanding block here. Can't have enough masking tape. I've almost gone through a whole roll. I actually used this a lot originally to do my layout design and prototype it